Chapter 8. Changed to Serve. We all stood at attention around Lyon, who stood regally on the ground in the middle of our army with shadow at his feet. His roar subsided slowly with beautiful tones ringing out, and the song cloud disappeared with a last wispy flash. Jesus walked into the clearing that was now like a giant crater where the mountain stronghold had previously stood. Our horses were gathered behind him. He began to sing as the roar came to an end. Your Spirit is on me, Father, because you anointed me. Sent me to tell the poor the good news about us, to heal the hearts broken and bruised, broadcast liberty and freedom, to live out of the prison as we totally forgive, to make public great grace in these victories, celebrate the devastation of the enemy and ending of his ways, to ease sorrow and care for needs, bring flowers to all that grieve, for my Zion to be free, for my Zion to be free. Messages of joy over heralds of doom. Praise and worship is all hearts make room, and shine away all the gloom with songs illuminating. We looked around with our magnified vision at the devastation for miles around the burned-out stronghold husk. Jesus sang on. They'll rebuild the old ruins, raise a new city out of the wreckage. They'll start over on the ruined cities, take the rubble left behind and make it new. As we looked into the city, we could see what looked like dead bodies strewn everywhere among the debris. Jade and Spirit came forward, and we mounted. We will ride in and see what is needed, Cameron charged loudly to the army. We'll split up. Captains, take your men into different areas and help where needed. We'll meet up again later when the shofar sounds. We all mounted up and flew up and out into our designated areas. Cameron and I headed to what had been a large metroplex. We could see what our battle had done. Many buildings were devastated, and others still standing were abandoned. Work was at a standstill. Not much was moving yet. We saw the nurses in white that we had seen before. Many more of them now moved among the bodies. They were still glowing. My cloak shuddered as it had before. My thoughts returned to that moment when I was agitated and had judged these nurses at what I thought was ignorance. My spirit opened to see that they had huge beating hearts that were weeping for the lost bodies. They had the love of Jesus and were patient in their assignment to touch the unloved. I quietly led Spirit away to an alley where I could talk to God in private and ask forgiveness. Let yourself feel what they feel. The harvest is plentiful, and the laborers of love are very few. Many different workers are needed. These are the real love carriers. Shadow purred. She only talked in rare moments, but they were always the right moments. I remembered a vision I had not long ago in which Jesus had appeared to me while in South Africa on a teaching tour. He began to write with his finger in the air. White-blue lines appeared like streams wherever he moved his fingers. "Oh, these must be your church streams," I noted to him. He nodded yes. He kept drawing more and more streams. They were flowing slowly like moving rivers. I noticed that none of them were touching each other. After he had filled the air around us with hundreds of these separate streams, he reached up and began to connect them with tiny arched lines. "Oh," I exclaimed, "we're going to be bridges for you to connect different streams." He shook his head. "No, these are not bridges. Bridges go over rivers and do not touch them. These are channels. You will be channel makers, and you will raise up other channel makers." At this point, I heard a rushing noise. The streams, which had been running slowly before, began rushing from these channel connections. All streams were now touching, causing a great flowing movement. I pondered all the different denominations, doctrines, and traditions formed and passed down in the history of Christianity. What would it take to bring them all together as one, leaving all differences of opinions behind and following one rule: love each other as He loves us? I was willing to do my small part, and I knew Cameron would agree. We would be channel makers, opening paths for all peoples and cultures to come together with all our different areas of wisdom and unique qualities to form a whole, all members working together as real love carriers. I cried and prayed for a time, and then rode back to the scene. Cameron looked over at me with another of his knowing looks, giant tears rolling down and splashing on his saddle. "We are all growing, my love," he said. I wiped my eyes and excitedly described the vision to him, adding, "This will be one of the most important works for us and others like us. We will share this vision with many and do our part to bring the great flowing movement to earth. What an honor to become a channel maker." Cameron, Shadow, and I flew up over the city to get an aerial view. As the nurses touched the bodies, we realized the people were not dead. They began to get up, dazed and shuddering as if from a long sleep. Suddenly, angels were everywhere, helping the nurses to wake the people. As they received the loving touch of the workers, their strength returned. They rose up, filled with rejoicing at their newfound feeling of freedom. The nurses then began to walk some of them into buildings called changing buildings. In these buildings, they received clothes just like the nurses were wearing. They came out glowing, completely changed. Then they went out and took their places, helping the nurses with the others who were just waking up. We saw others wake up and go into what were called service buildings. They came out with different symbols sewn into their clothes. People were streaming into these buildings from outside areas as well. There were farming symbols, financial symbols, council, construction, food service, and every other service. They were no longer considered jobs, but services. The motto of these new buildings was written in bright red letters next to a red cross above each door: "Change to serve." We knew that this was the future of true community. Everyone would do their part and share as all were one, serving each other with peace and dignity. The civilian nurse army grew very fast. They began to band together and work in the cities, rebuilding the ruins stone by stone, bringing light wherever they went. Christ's true love spread very quickly, and the city was soon full of new teams of these love-filled workers. We could see more into the future as businesses were restarted and employees were awakened by the touch of the servants and angels. All were being changed to serve each other. The channels were already starting to connect. The great flowing movement had begun. The change to serve buildings were in strategic spots in all the cities that were set free from our battle in the stronghold. From our sky view, we saw that each one of the buildings had a huge red cross painted on the roof. The restoration was a fantastic sight. Shadow pointed to new institutions. They were going up all over the cities to teach the ways of God in all manners of life and living. There were schools for all ages, not just children. Schools for marriage, building communities, schools for parenting, music and creativity, and so on. They were all designed under the motto, change to serve. Everyone was attending, not just new converts. Modern Christians claiming to know Christ before the war had no idea how to do most of these things either. The love nurses, with the angels' help, were the first teachers. Creative arts and music school buildings were alive and humming with sound reverberations and color. Everyone went through these at one time or another in their new schooling, not because they had to, but because they were born to and their hearts drew them. There was no boredom and no homework. The teachers in schools were full of life, worship, the living words of God, sounds of heaven and joy, and much more. Anyone could go to any and as many schools as they wanted to, after which they would go to their designated place and begin their life's work. There were really no rules, but everything was ordered, a perfectly organic, free order. Students of all ages were elated during these school days. No one needed to compete, no one was rejected, no one was jealous. Everyone was enraptured in their newfound freedom and preparation for true living, living to serve. One of the most beautiful observances was to see the way the different cultures and streams of Christians and newly changed people were helping each other by teaching them the strong points of what they had learned in their culture and religious beliefs. This was the outcome of the Channel Maker vision. Anything that was not lined up with the true life of Christ had fallen during the war. What we had left were the true revelations and teachings of Father God to give to each other. It was truly causing a great flowing movement of love among us, one that had never been seen or heard of before. As we continued our surveillance, we saw piles of dead demon bodies being burned outside the cities, in trenches, in isolated fields. I recognized the bulldozer angels in their overalls who were digging the ditches. I waved and shouted from the sky, and Shadow roared her small, happy roar. The angels looked up at us and grinned. I would like to hang out with them. They seem so peaceful and content and like they have a great sense of humor, I said. Cameron and Shadow laughed. Shadow nodded in agreement as if she knew them well. These are worker angels. You will see them many times in many forms and with many implements, she said. And I really want to ride on one of those things, I said, looking at their bulldozers. Of course, the bulldozers were not normal. They looked both old and modern at the same time, very fast, with a computer on each one at the angels' feet, so they could work all the gears effortlessly. The cabs had triple-stacked helicopter blades for lifting and flying. Next time, Cameron said, now we have a meeting. We flew back down to the main intersection and went into a brand new changing building. There we met with several of the nurses who had been through the whole ordeal. One of them spoke for the rest. I was helping an old woman who was crippled and homeless when the tremors began. There came a great shaking past any earthquake scale we could remember ever hearing about. Buildings began to fall all around us. Almost all the people who survived were rubbing their wrists, ankles, and necks and squinting as if coming out into bright sun after a dark room. Then they would just collapse and go into coma-like states. Demons and horrible monsters swarmed out from all corners and dark places of the city, he continued. Some were trying to escape. Others were trying to bring as much devastation as they could before their time ran out. Some were not strong enough to last even a minute and fell to the ground, stunned and dazed. We could see they were all losing power. He went on. The nurses and angels were few, and we were the only ones who could see and hear the demons. And then we heard a beautiful, powerful song. It seemed to be causing some of the demons to drop dead and weakening many of the others. So we joined in, adding our own songs. We finished off many demons ourselves. We keep our weapons hidden in our clothes. I looked at Shadow with watery eyes. I vowed to never judge God's servants again. Shadow purred, and I picked her up and hugged her close. A female nurse continued, "We were in the middle of this great shaking, helping out as best we could when we heard the roar. The reports from others throughout the cities are all the same. When the roar came, everything that was not built on the foundation of God's love for His Son and His children began to fall. Not many buildings were left standing. Even most church buildings and meeting centers caved in, and nearly all of the people went into a coma-like state. After the roar died down, there was a long period of stillness and silence. We felt permeated through and through by this roar, with more resolve than we had ever known. A new fire rose up inside of us, and a fresh passion was lit." "Well," continued the first nurse, "we knew what to do. We went to the fallen, wounded, and half-dead people. Our hands were on fire, and the warmth of our touch brought immediate life and healing. We never stopped until all were touched. Some went into changing buildings for a period of time, while others received a full transformation right away and joined our efforts immediately. Then you flew out of the sky to us." Shadow stepped forward and spoke with authority in her childlike voice and with a power I had not heard from her before. "Let us gather together all of the other nurses and humble leaders who are here. I will tell you all a shadow of what is to come, and then we will pray before we take our leave." The other nurses and leaders arrived quickly. Shadow explained to them all that we had seen for the future and the rebuilding vision of Jesus' song. She added many more details as she could see beyond any of us. She talked of many more battles and how the victories would be won, of defeats and the lessons in them. She described a unity coming that was the pivotal point of all the victories, and how the world would be changed to serve through it all. It was amazing. We prayed together and said our goodbyes. I went outside into the fresh air and blew my shofar. It rang out far and wide to call the others to join us on the crater mount where we had first brought the stronghold down. Just as we were about to leave, a young girl of about 11 came into the building. She seemed frail, but yet had strength about her. She went straight to Shadow, who bowed before her. "Hello, I dreamed about you last night. I have something to give you. During the war, I followed a very large demon through the alley behind my house. He was trying to get away, but he was dying. I took a knife from my mother's drawer and went up behind him and stabbed him in the back. He died very easily. He smelled so horrible I nearly fainted. But as he was dying, I saw something clenched in his hand. I had to cut off most of his fingers to get it. It was really gross. Then I dreamed I would meet a lion cub and give it to her." She held out a jeweled box to Shadow. "The jeweled key!" I shouted excitedly to Shadow. "The box matches your key." It was still around Shadow's neck after all we had been through since the worshiping angels gave it to her. "I believe that belongs to me," Jesus stated as he walked in through the wall at the back of the building. "Peace," he said. Everyone bowed. Cameron and I went down on our knees as well. Jesus walked up to the girl, and she handed him the box with familiar awe. Shadow stood at Jesus' feet with the key in her mouth. Jesus took the key and the girl's hand and walked outside. We all followed him. He put the key in the keyhole of the box and opened it in front of him. A wonderful fragrance wafted up and out of the box. It was like ancient spices mixed with the most delicate aromatic flowers and many other mysterious scents. It swirled out and down the street in a tangible trail, breaking off into many more paths to spread all over the city. You could see it pass people and mesmerize them as they stopped what they were doing to smell the fresh scent. "This was a gift from my mother," Jesus said. "She saved it for me through my life here on earth. A fallen angel stole it from a storehouse in my Father's home. My mother called it the fragrance of Christ box. In it are pieces of my earthly life from birth to death, incense of myrrh and frankincense, wood shavings, dried flecks of wine from my first miracle, a thorn, and pieces of garments stained with my own sweat and blood. It will change the atmosphere everywhere it goes, and now let it perfume the earth forever." We watched as the fragrance of Christ curled throughout the city and off into the distance. I remembered Jesus saying, "Give them bouquets of roses instead of ashes." Jesus handed the box back to the girl. "Take care of this for me, my child."